Hi, good morning. I've just got a couple of thoughts for you this morning. Do you remember that song that was written? It was like a kid's song years ago, and it made its round around the church circles at any rate. Perhaps you heard it in a kids group or a kids club. It was all the Hebrew names for God, and it was actually called Jehovah Jireh, the song. But it had terms like Jehovah Jireh, which means God will provide, Jehovah Rophi, God will heal, Jehovah Kedesh, the God who sanctifies, and then there's a line that's through it that goes Jehovah Rohi, God my shepherd. And isn't it really cool that our God has got all these fantastic nicknames? And perhaps if you haven't heard any of those, perhaps you would have heard perhaps him called Elohim or Yahweh, perhaps. He's just got such an amazing set of names or attributes, doesn't he? And that final one that I said, Jehovah Rophi, the Lord is my shepherd. Don't we just need to know that at the moment that God is a God that looks after us and that God cares for us, that looks after the vulnerable, perhaps even the invisible in society? That's not a lyric that you find in everyday songs, is it, Jehovah Rohi? And it's not normally followed in the Bible at any point by the word Jehovah either. It's normally just the simple term El, and El means God. So it means God is our shepherd. But Rohi is also translated not just shepherd, but seer, or to see, or to gaze. So it means El Rohi means the God who sees us, the God who sees me. That's just phenomenal, isn't it? Haley and I went to China a few years back. Fantastic place to be, great people to meet. But there was at times that in a massive sea of people, we got lost. And it's so easy in that country, just to be a number, simply because the vast amount of people that need to be processed at times when you're in a queue for something or anything else, there's just so many folks. And the people that we stayed with said, why don't you learn a few words of Chinese, and why don't you make eye contact with people and notice people and have a conversation with them? And that's what God does for us. He notices us in this sea of folks almost, in this sea of creation. He sees us. El Rohi, the God who sees you, the God who sees me. It says in the book of Matthew that God sees even the sparrows and that he cares for those. And how much more does he care for us? How much more does God see us and see our needs and who we are? Like I said, the names of God appear all over the Bible as you'd expect. But that one term, El Rohi, only appears in one really unusual place. And that is in Genesis 16 in the story of Hagar. Now, if you're not familiar with that, I'm not going to read the entire story. I'll just give you some highlights. There's three characters in the story. There's Abraham, there's Sarah, his wife, and there's Hagar. Abraham was near enough 100 years old at this point in the story. And he'd been given some promises years and years in his past that he was going to be the father of many nations. There was just one issue at this point. At 100, he had no kids, and that was difficult. That could have been embarrassing. He was believing God had said, you're going to have many nations. He hadn't even had one child at that point. Anyway, at the suggestion of his wife Sarah, he sleeps with this slave, Hagar, this Egyptian slave. Anyway, she gets pregnant, and things seem to be going along dandy and fine, as if it was. But as what happens normally in life and in pregnancy, that this young mom starts getting a little bit protective, and so the relationship between Sarah and Hagar, understandably, just goes south. It really goes sour and pretty quickly, and Sarah starts to mistreat Hagar. And Hagar goes, well, actually, I'm not putting up with this. I'm doing a runner. And she runs out to the desert. Wouldn't we all in that circumstance do that? Anyway, she bumps into what the Bible says, an angel of the Lord, a messenger of God. And this messenger tells her that the son that she's carrying is also going to form a great nation. And suddenly Hagar shouts out, El Rohi, El Rohi, you're the God who sees me. You're the God who knows my circumstances. You're the God who understands me. And I have seen the one who sees me. I have seen the one who sees me. And that's all well and good in that story, but how does that relate to us today? And perhaps we can say, well, yeah, God sees the outcasts of society. Perhaps he sees the homeless person. And does he see the refugee? Does he see those people that are the outcasts? You know, the ones that perhaps have got the strange personalities that nobody associates with. And does he see you? And does he see me? In other words, does he see the invisible people in our society? And it's so easy to think that God's forgotten us, isn't it? It's so easy to think that God's forgotten them. But that's not the truth. God is the God who sees. So here's just 3 quick thoughts to consider as we consider, does God see? 1, we mostly see God's faithfulness in hindsight. That's when we sort of like look back over time. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm absolutely hopeless at this, but my wife is really good at it. She's really good at keeping a diary. She's been really good at keeping notes about her life. She's really good at times about keeping a prayer diary as well. And like I said, I'm not really good at that. But one amazing thing that it does is that when I read that, when I get a hold of her notes and I look back, I can see how God's moved through a circumstance and situation that I didn't realize at the time when I thought God hadn't even noticed me or noticed us as a family. And we know that our God never changes. He's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So therefore, we know that because God was faithful in the past, when we couldn't see him, that he's faithful in our circumstances today, perhaps when we don't see him. And he'll be faithful in our circumstances of tomorrow. God hasn't forgotten us. God sees us. God saw us in our past. God sees us in our now, and he'll see us in our tomorrow too. Secondly, Jesus has a track record of seeing the marginalized and the outcast in society. The Bible tells us, you know, that Jesus, that God can count the hairs on everybody's head. And that's easier for him on some others. Well, actually, it's easier on me than some others. Jesus had every opportunity to be the king, to be that lead person in society, to be that to be that sort of like head and shoulders person that's above everybody else. But he didn't choose to do that. He could have been a Pharisee, he could have been a Sadducee, he could have been any kind of C. But he didn't choose to do that. No. He chose to hang out with prostitutes. He chose to hang out with tax collectors. He chose to hang out with sinners. He chose to hang around with those kinds of people that society was trying to erase, or that were invisible or couldn't be seen. You see, he chose to hang out with them because he saw them. He knew them. He saw them. Everybody else who were trying to erase, he saw them. He saw them as people worth spending time with. He saw every one of them. He saw the ones that were in the sidelines. He saw them as people worth spending time with. He loved them. He spoke to them. He was with them. And if you kind of are trying to keep a score with God and you reckon you're in the minus figures, I challenge you today. I challenge you to think differently. God sees you, God knows you, and God loves you. You know, in that story of Abraham and Sarah and Hagar, Abraham and Sarah never mention Hagar by name. It's that servant. It's that slave girl. It's never Hagar. But as soon as she bumps into that messenger from God, what's the first words? Hagar. God saw her as a person, not as a station, not as an object, but as a person. God saw her in her need as a person. God gave her dignity when nobody else gave her dignity. And God sees you and God knows you as a person. Number 3, God sees all our daily needs. You know, it's really easy to take the everyday for granted, isn't it? We took our freedom for granted until we all ended up locked down. We took our breathing for granted until we all had to wear a mask. We took our toilet roll for granted until the supermarket ran out. And we need to look closely at our daily blessings and our daily provision from God. You see, we see all these massive needs in our life, our wants. We want this. God, why didn't you supply for this? Why didn't you do this? Yet the reality is that through every day of our life, God has provided for us. God has sustained us. And without that, we would not even be alive today. But we don't notice that. All we want is this. But God has been doing this continually throughout our lives. We need to count our blessings. Count them one by one. You know, we're ace at keeping lists. We keep to-do lists. We keep shopping lists. Throughout a game, we'll keep scores. Why don't we keep a record of the blessings of God? Why don't we do that? You know, we've got a shopping list that's on our fridge, and when we need something, we just jot down what we need on that, ready for the next shopping trip. And I said to Hayley this week, I said, why don't we keep a list that's next to that? There's just a list of the simple blessings that we've had from God that day. And I just want to challenge you to have a go at that this week too. Keep a list of God's blessings for you. Try to create an attitude of gratitude. God saw Hagar throughout her entire journey, but Hagar didn't really see God in her life until she looked back over it. So in conclusion, we mostly see God in hindsight. We can see that Jesus had a track record of seeing those people that others didn't, the invisible in society. God sees us in our daily needs, not just in our perceived needs. You have a God who sees you. You have a God that sees your past, you have a God that sees your now, and you have a God that sees your future. You have a God that will never stop seeing you. He never sleeps, not even for a second. God sees you. See you next time.